One spilled glass of vintage Burgundy was all it took to trigger the most terrifying syndicate lockdown Chicago had ever witnessed. A billionaire real estate mogul thought he could publicly humiliate a terrified minimum-wage waitress, completely unaware that the silent, brooding man in the corner booth was Lorenzo Conti, the ruthless, untouchable head of the Italian Mafia. By midnight, private flights were grounded. Offshore, accounts were violently drained, and a sprawling metropolis was paralyzed, all because Lorenzo whispered two lethal words: "She's mine." Crystal chandeliers cast a golden, unforgiving light over the dining room of Laura Chicago's most exclusive culinary establishment. Getting a reservation here required either a 6-month wait or a net worth that ended in a B. Tonight the air was thick with the scent of white truffles, expensive Tom Ford cologne, and old money. Chloe Henderson didn't belong here, and she knew it. Balancing a silver tray loaded with 3 glasses of Domaine de la Romane Conti, a wine that cost more per bottle than her entire year's rent. Chloe felt a bead of sweat trace a cold path down her spine. Her black regulation uniform felt suffocating. Her feet, clad in cheap non-slip shoes, throbbed with the familiar ache of a 14-hour double shift. She was 23, drowning in her younger brother's staggering medical debt, and desperately needed this job. One mistake at Laura meant immediate termination. At table 4 sat Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was a man who wore his wealth like a weapon. A real estate developer, notorious for bulldozing historic neighborhoods to build soulless glass-paneled high-rises, he was loud, abrasive, and currently deeply intoxicated. He was surrounded by a sycophantic entourage of junior executives and women draped in diamonds they hadn't purchased. "I'm telling you," Caldwell boomed his voice, slicing through the sophisticated hum of the restaurant. "You don't negotiate with the zoning board, you buy the board. That's how real power works in this city." Chloe approached the table, her hands trembling imperceptibly. She kept her eyes averted, a survival mechanism she had honed over months of serving the ultra-rich. "Excuse me, sir," she murmured, her voice soft and deferential. "Your wine." "About damn time." Caldwell snapped, not even looking at her. He threw his arm out in a wide theatrical gesture, just as Chloe stepped forward to place the first crystal goblet on the pristine white tablecloth. The collision was inevitable. Caldwell's heavy, Rolex-clad wrist smashed into the edge of the silver tray. The laws of physics took over. Time seemed to drastically slow down for Chloe as the tray tilted. 3 glasses of the world's most expensive vintage Burgundy launched into the air, completely defying gravity for a horrifying fraction of a second, before descending directly onto Richard Caldwell's custom-tailored, cream-colored Brioni suit. The sound of shattering baccarat crystal echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. A collective gasp swept across the surrounding tables. The low hum of conversation died instantly. Even the jazz pianist in the corner fumbled his keys, the music screeching to a painful halt. "Are you completely blind, you stupid bitch?" Caldwell roared, leaping to his feet. The crimson wine dripped from his jacket lapels, looking violently like blood against the pale fabric. I'm so sorry, sir. Please, Chloe stammered, dropping to her knees, immediately frantically grabbing a white linen napkin to blot at the dark red stain. Panic clawed at her throat, constricting her airway. She could already see her termination papers. She could already hear the collection agencies calling about her brother's hospital bills. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Caldwell snarled. He didn't just push her away. He reached down his large, heavy hand, clamping around Chloe's fragile wrist like an industrial vice. He yanked her upward with brutal force, pulling her to her feet so fast her vision blurred. Chloe cried out in genuine pain, trying to pull back, but Caldwell's grip was unyielding. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Caldwell spat his face, inches from hers, his breath reeking of gin and malice. "It costs more than your miserable, worthless life. Look at you. You're nothing. You're a clumsy, pathetic little peasant who can't even carry a tray without ruining things for people who actually matter. Please, you're hurting me," Chloe whispered, a tear spilling over her lashes. The entire restaurant was watching, paralyzed by the spectacle. Waitstaff stood frozen in terror. The maitre d' was visibly trembling, too afraid of Caldwell's immense wealth to intervene. "I'll do more than hurt you," Caldwell hissed, his ego deeply bruised by the public embarrassment. "I'm going to ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will garnish your pathetic minimum wage until you are living on the street where you belong." Caldwell raised his free hand, his fingers curling into a tight, threatening fist, preparing to shove her backward onto the shattered glass. He never got the chance. In the darkest, most secluded corner booth of Laura, shadows seemed to bend around a singular, terrifying presence. Lorenzo Conti did not come to the restaurant to be seen. He came because he owned it, along with half the commercial real estate in the downtown loop, several shipping ports, and a vast subterranean network of power that no legal authority had ever managed to dismantle. He was a man chiseled from pure, unyielding Sicilian marble, impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that hid the lethal coiled muscle beneath. Lorenzo possessed eyes the color of a frozen ocean, pale, piercing, and entirely devoid of mercy. He had been watching Chloe all evening. There was something about her that had caught his heavily guarded attention. Perhaps it was the genuine, exhausted kindness in her smile when she served a difficult patron earlier, or the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated on balancing her tray. To Lorenzo, a man who lived in a world of deception, extreme violence, and calculated lies, Chloe's transparent, innocent struggle was intoxicatingly pure. When the glass shattered, Lorenzo didn't flinch, but when Caldwell wrapped his hand around Chloe's wrist and yanked her upward, the temperature in Lorenzo's corner booth seemed to plummet to absolute zero. Dominic Lorenzo's heavily scarred underboss, who was seated across from him, saw the micro-shift in his boss's posture. Dominic immediately set down his fork. "Boss," Dominic murmured quietly. Lorenzo didn't answer. He simply stood up. When Lorenzo Conti moved, it was not with haste, but with the terrifying, deliberate grace of an apex predator closing in on a kill. The heavy, rhythmic sound of his leather Oxfords against the hardwood floor seemed to echo louder than anything else in the dead, silent room. As Lorenzo approached table 4, the ambient air grew suffocating. Patrons who recognized him, and many of the old money elites, did visibly shrank back into their velvet chairs, averting their eyes, terrified of drawing his attention. Caldwell, utterly consumed by his own petty rage, was entirely oblivious. He was still glaring down at Chloe, his grip tightening enough to leave deep purple bruises on her pale skin. "Remove your hand from her." The voice was not loud. It did not boom like Caldwell's. It was a low, resonant baritone, smooth as aged whiskey, but laced with an undercurrent of such extreme violence that it made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand at strict attention. Caldwell froze his fist, still half raised. He turned his head, a sneer, twisting his features, fully prepared to berate whoever dared to interrupt him. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The words died in Caldwell's throat the instant his eyes met Lorenzo's. Caldwell was wealthy, yes, but he was civilian wealthy. He dealt in zoning permits and city council bribes. The man standing before him dealt in life-death and absolute terrifying dominion. Caldwell recognized Lorenzo from a high-stakes underground poker game years ago, a game where Lorenzo had calmly ordered the execution of a cheating cartel boss, without once raising his voice or looking away from his cards. All the blood violently drained from Caldwell's face, leaving him the color of ash. His hand, previously locked around Chloe's wrist, suddenly opened as if he had been burned by fire. Chloe stumbled backward, clutching her throbbing arm to her chest. She looked up at her savior through tear-filled eyes. She didn't know who this tall, terrifyingly handsome stranger was, but she could feel the sheer magnetic force of his authority. Mr. Conti. Caldwell stammered, his previous bravado collapsing into pathetic, trembling cowardice. I apologize. I didn't see you there. This clumsy girl, she ruined my jacket. I saw what happened. Lorenzo interrupted, his tone chillingly flat. He stepped smoothly between Caldwell and Chloe, his broad shoulders effectively shielding her from the developer's view. He didn't look at Caldwell. Instead, he slowly turned his head to glance over his shoulder at Chloe. His frozen ocean eyes softened by a microscopic fraction as he took in her pale, terrified face and the red marks forming on her wrist. "Are you injured?" he asked her, his voice dropping to a gentler timbre intended only for her ears. Chloe shook her head, rapidly, too stunned to speak. Lorenzo turned his attention back to Caldwell. The softness vanished, replaced by an icy, monolithic wrath. "You laid your hands on something that doesn't belong to you." Caldwell swallowed hard, sweat suddenly pouring down his forehead. "Listen, Lorenzo, it's just a waitress. I'll pay for the damages to the restaurant. She is not just a waitress," Lorenzo stated, his voice carrying clearly to every terrified patron in the room. He reached back, his large, warm hand gently enveloping Chloe's uninjured wrist, pulling her slightly closer to the protective warmth of his back. "She's mine." The declaration landed like a bomb in the middle of the dining room. Chloe gasped quietly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had never met this man in her life. Caldwell physically took a step back, his eyes darting frantically around the room, realizing exactly how colossal his mistake was. To touch a woman claimed by the head of the Conti syndicate was not a faux pas. It was a death sentence. "Lorenzo, please, I swear to God, I didn't know," Caldwell pleaded, his voice cracking. The billionaire was nearly weeping in front of his own entourage. "Leave," Lorenzo commanded softly. "Yes, of course, right away. Not just the restaurant." Lorenzo cut him off, his eyes narrowing into lethal slits. "Leave Chicago. If the sun rises tomorrow and you are still breathing the air in my city, I will personally ensure you are never found. Do you understand me, Richard?" Yes, understood." Caldwell babbled, abandoning his entourage, abandoning his pride, and practically sprinting for the exit, leaving a trail of expensive burgundy dripping on the floor behind him. Lorenzo turned fully to Chloe. The terrifying Mafia boss reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a silk handkerchief. With surprising, devastating gentleness, he reached out and wiped a stray drop of wine from Chloe's trembling cheek. "Go to the back room," Lorenzo told her quietly. "Dominic will take you home. You are done working here. You are done working forever." Fear is a powerful motivator, but wounded pride combined with blinding arrogance is often fatal. Richard Caldwell did not leave Chicago. Once he reached the safety of his sprawling penthouse on the Gold Coast, the terror that had paralyzed him in Laura began to curdle into toxic resentment. He poured himself a heavy glass of scotch, pacing his marble floors. Who was Lorenzo Conti to banish him? Caldwell had friends in the mayor's office. He had a private security force composed of ex-military operatives. He was a titan of industry. He convinced himself that Lorenzo's threat in the restaurant was merely a theatrical display of power to impress the crowd. By 2 a.m., Caldwell made the worst decision of his incredibly privileged life. he decided to strike back, aiming for the perceived weak link, the waitress. He picked up his encrypted phone and dialed his head of security. "Find that girl from the restaurant, Chloe Henderson. Send a team to her apartment. Tear the place apart, terrify her, and drag her to one of my warehouses in the industrial district. I want to send Conti a message that he doesn't own this city." What Caldwell did not realize was that Lorenzo Conti did not just own the city. He was its very central nervous system. Within 90 seconds of Caldwell making that phone call, the encrypted signal was intercepted by Conti's subterranean cyber surveillance division. 2 minutes later, Dominic was walking into the private, soundproofed study of Lorenzo's estate, holding a tablet. Lorenzo was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering skyline of Chicago, a glass of bourbon resting loosely in his hand. He had not slept. He could still feel the rapid, terrified pulse of Chloe's wrist beneath his fingers. "Boss," Dominic said, his heavily scarred face grim. Caldwell didn't run. He just ordered a hit team to grab the girl. "They are en route to her apartment right now." The glass of bourbon in Lorenzo's hand shattered. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. The absolute stillness that overtook Lorenzo was infinitely more terrifying than a violent outburst. He slowly looked at his bleeding hand, then turned his freezing gaze to Dominic. "Shut it down," Lorenzo commanded, his voice devoid of all human warmth. "Shut down the entire city." "To what extent, boss?" Dominic asked, already pulling out his secure radio. "Total quarantine," Lorenzo stated, walking toward his weapons vault. "No one associated with Caldwell leaves. Call the Union bosses. Halt all outbound trains from Union Station. Ground all private flights out of O'Hare and Midway. Call the harbor master and lock down the marinas." "And Caldwell's assets?" "Drain them," Lorenzo replied, sliding a sleek custom Glock 19 into his shoulder holster. "Call the offshore contacts in the Caymans. Liquidate his holdings. By sunrise, I want Richard Caldwell to be a ghost with empty pockets. But first, we secure what is mine." Chloe lived in a dilapidated apartment complex on the south side, a stark contrast to the luxury of Laura. She hadn't slept. She was sitting on her worn-out sofa, clutching her phone, terrified of what the morning would bring. The man in the restaurant, Lorenzo, had saved her, but the way he looked at her, the absolute possession in his voice, terrified her just as much as Caldwell had. At 2:45 a.m., the sound of heavy tactical boots echoed loudly in the narrow hallway outside her door. Chloe froze. Her heart hammered into her throat. She heard men whispering roughly. Caldwell's mercenaries had arrived. A heavy metallic thud echoed as someone began to ram the flimsy deadbolt of her door. "Open up, bitch! We know you're in there!" a gruff voice shouted. Chloe backed away, grabbing a useless kitchen knife from the counter, tears of pure terror streaming down her face. The door began to splinter. One more hit, and it would give way entirely. Crash. The door didn't just break, it was kicked entirely off its hinges, flying into the living room. But the men who stepped inside were not Caldwell's mercenaries. It was a bloodbath in the hallway. Lorenzo Conti stepped over the unconscious, brutally beaten bodies of Caldwell's elite security team without a single glance downward. He filled the doorway of her small apartment, a dark, imposing god of vengeance. He was flanked by 6 men, heavily armed with suppressed automatic rifles, but Lorenzo himself looked perfectly calm, immaculate, in a black trench coat over his suit. Chloe dropped the kitchen knife, her hands over her mouth, trembling violently. Lorenzo's eyes locked onto her. Immediately the lethal freezing aura surrounding him vanished, replaced by an intense, possessive relief. He crossed the small room in 3 long strides. "You're safe," he murmured, his voice incredibly gentle as he reached out carefully, wrapping his arms around her trembling form. He pulled her against his solid chest, tucking her head under his chin. I've got you. They will never touch you again." "Who? What is happening?" Chloe sobbed into his coat, overwhelmed by the violence, the fear, and the strange, intoxicating safety of his embrace. "I am relocating you," Lorenzo stated, simply rubbing her back to soothe her tremors. "You are coming with me. This apartment is no longer safe." Outside the city of Chicago was descending into an invisible chaos. At O'Hare International, Richard Caldwell's private Gulfstream jet was suddenly surrounded by heavy fuel trucks, actively blocking it from reaching the runway. The pilot, thoroughly bribed by Conti's men, had vanished. At the central banking hub, Caldwell's digital empire was being systematically dismantled. Billions of dollars in leveraged assets were being frozen, redirected, and erased by phantom hackers operating out of a basement in Little Italy. Caldwell himself was currently staring at his computer screen in his penthouse, watching error messages pop up on every single banking portal he tried to access. Access denied. Account frozen. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. Trembling, Caldwell answered it. "Richard." Lorenzo's voice echoed through the receiver, smooth, dark, and final. "I gave you a chance to run. You chose to target my woman instead." "Lorenzo, wait, my accounts, my planes, everything is blocked," Caldwell screamed in panic. "You are locked in, Richard," Lorenzo whispered. "The city exits are closed to you. My men are currently in the lobby of your building. They are in the elevators. You have exactly 2 minutes to pray." The line went dead. Lorenzo slipped his phone back into his pocket. He looked down at Chloe, who was looking up at him with wide, confused eyes from the safety of his arms. "Come, mia cara," Lorenzo said softly, effortlessly, lifting her into his arms, carrying her bridal style out of the rundown apartment. "Let's go home." Sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass woke Chloe from the first truly deep sleep she had experienced in years. She did not wake up to the familiar jarring sound of the elevated train rattling past her south side window, nor did she feel the broken springs of her thrift store mattress digging into her spine. Instead, she was enveloped in the cloud-like embrace of custom-spun fret linens lying in a bed large enough to comfortably sleep 4. Panic, cold and sharp, immediately pierced her chest. The events of the previous night crashed into her consciousness. The spilled Domaine de la Romanée Conti. Richard Caldwell's brutal grip, the terrifying intervention of Lorenzo Conti, and the absolute carnage outside her apartment door. Chloe threw off the silk duvet and scrambled out of bed. The bedroom she found herself in was staggering in its opulence. It looked less like a home and more like a spread-in architectural digest, featuring dark mahogany accents, muted charcoal walls, and a massive roaring fireplace carved from Italian marble. She rushed to the window. Below her stretched acres of impeccably manicured lawns, ending at the turbulent iron-grey waters of Lake Michigan. High stone walls topped with subtle but unmistakable military-grade security cameras enclosed the entire property. She was in Lake Forest, the most exclusive enclave of wealth in the Midwest. She was in a fortress. "You are awake." Chloe spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. He was no longer wearing the bespoke charcoal suit from the restaurant, dressed in a fitted black Henley shirt that stretched tight over the heavy, scarred musculature of his chest and arms, and dark, tailored trousers. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like the ruthless syndicate boss he truly was. In his hand, he held a steaming cup of coffee. Where is my brother?" Chloe choked out the terrifying realization hitting her. "Leo, he's at St. Jude's. He's recovering from his marrow transplant. If Caldwell's men went to my apartment, they might go after him. I have to call the hospital. I have to—" "Breathe, Chloe." Lorenzo commanded his voice, a low, soothing rumble that commanded instant obedience. He crossed the vast room, stopping exactly 2 feet away from her, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to respect her terrified boundaries. He extended the coffee cup toward her. "Drink this. And listen to me." Chloe took the cup with trembling hands, the rich scent of dark roast momentarily grounding her. She looked up into his pale, freezing eyes, searching for a lie, but found only an absolute, unwavering certainty. At 3:15 a.m., while you were sleeping in my armored Maybach, an extraction team from my personal guard entered St. Jude's. Lorenzo explained calmly, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Your brother Leo Henderson has been safely relocated to the private VIP penthouse wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The entire floor has been bought out. He is currently being attended to by Dr. Harrison Sterling, the top pediatric oncologist in North America. There are 4 armed men outside his door, 2 inside, and the hospital's security network has been overridden by my IT division." Chloe stared at him, her mind completely short-circuiting. You moved him to Northwestern. Do you have any idea how much that costs? I don't have insurance that covers—" "His medical debts have been entirely erased," Lorenzo interrupted softly. Chloe swayed on her feet, the coffee splashing over the rim of the porcelain cup. "Erased, that was over $400,000. You paid it. I liquidated one of Caldwell's offshore Cayman accounts before the federal regulators could notice the discrepancy." Lorenzo stated, a dark, dangerous smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Consider it a heavily taxed apology from the man who ruined your uniform. Your brother will want for nothing. He will receive the finest care in the world, and he will live a long, healthy life." Tears, hot and blinding, spilled over Chloe's cheeks. For 3 years she had worked herself to the bone, drowning in eviction notices and collection calls, terrified every single day that Leo would be kicked out of treatment. And this terrifying, beautiful monster of a man had simply wiped it out before breakfast. "Why?" Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. She looked at him, desperately trying to understand. "I am nobody. I'm just a clumsy waitress who spilled wine. Why are you doing this? Why did you say I was yours?" Lorenzo's expression hardened, the easy confidence vanishing, as something dark and profoundly possessive flared in his eyes. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached out his large, calloused thumb, gently wiping the tears from her cheek. His touch was incredibly warm, a stark contrast to his freezing gaze. "In my world, Chloe, everything is a transaction," Lorenzo murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Every smile is a lie, every handshake is a threat, and innocence does not exist. It is beaten out of us before we learn how to read. But last night I watched you. I watched you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, exhausted, terrified, but still entirely pure. You didn't belong in that room full of vipers." His hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling lightly in her messy hair, his thumb resting over her racing pulse. "When Caldwell touched you," Lorenzo continued, his voice vibrating with barely restrained violence, "something inside me snapped. I have spent my entire life building an empire of blood and steel to ensure no one could ever take what belongs to me. You belong with me, Chloe. You belong in the light, protected by my shadows. I will burn Chicago to its foundational bedrock before I let another man lay a hostile hand on you." Chloe shivered, utterly captivated by the raw, unyielding devotion radiating from him. It was terrifying to be the sole focus of a man who controlled a city, yet for the first time in her life, she felt completely, unequivocally safe. I don't know how to be part of your world, she confessed, looking down at his chest. You don't have to be, Lorenzo promised, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. You just have to let me protect you. Now drink your coffee. We have a war to finish. High above the paralyzed streets of the magnificent Mile, Richard Caldwell was rapidly unraveling. His sprawling $50 million penthouse atop the Waldorf Astoria felt like a gilded tomb. Through his panoramic windows, he could see the absolute chaos Lorenzo Conti had orchestrated. The loop was gridlocked. Supply trucks were backed up for miles on the I-90 expressway because the Teamsters Union, firmly in Conti's pocket, had declared a sudden, unannounced strike. Worse, Caldwell's financial empire was effectively reduced to ash. His CFO had called him an hour ago, weeping, explaining that their corporate routing numbers had been wiped from the global SWIFT system. To the financial world, Caldwell Real Estate Holdings no longer existed. Mr. Caldwell. Arthur Pendleton, his white-haired, deeply panicked attorney, stammered from the leather sofa. We have to surrender. Call the FBI. Call the mayor. Conti is systematically destroying everything. The mayor isn't picking up, Caldwell screamed, throwing a crystal decanter against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The FBI won't touch Conti without a year-long RICO case, and by tonight I'll be dead, he warned me. If the sun sets and I'm still in Chicago, I'm a dead man. Then we must flee, sir. Take the helicopter. The helicopter pilot mysteriously broke both of his legs this morning. Caldwell snarled his eyes, bloodshot and wide with manic desperation. He paced the room, running a hand through his thinning hair. He was completely out of options. Lorenzo controlled the roads, the air, and the water. Unless there was one faction in Chicago that hated the Italian syndicate almost as much as Caldwell currently did. Caldwell practically dove for his encrypted satellite phone, dialing a number he had sworn never to use. The line rang 3 times before a thick, gravelly voice answered. Well now, to what do I owe the pleasure of a call from the great Richard Caldwell, especially on a day when the Italians seem to be throwing such a lovely, violent tantrum? Declan Caldwell breathed out, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Declan Fitzpatrick was the undisputed head of the Irish mob on the South Side. While Conti controlled the politicians, the high-end real estate, and the global shipping, Declan controlled the gritty underbelly, the illegal armories, the underground fighting rings, and a fiercely loyal army of heavily armed men who feared absolutely nothing. I need an extraction, Caldwell demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Conti has the city locked down. I need a convoy to get me out of the state line into Indiana. I know you control the southern smuggling routes. Declan chuckled a dark, scraping sound. And why would I risk an open war with Lorenzo Conti over a washed-up suit who spilled wine on a waitress? Word travels fast, Richard. You insulted his new pet. The man is currently dismantling your life for sport. Because I still have one offshore account that Conti's hackers haven't found, Caldwell lied smoothly, his survival instinct taking over. It's a blind trust in Zurich. $60 million. Get me to Indiana alive, and I'll transfer the entire balance to you. Silence hung on the line. $60 million was a sum that could easily fund a full-scale turf war. $60 million, Declan mused. That buys a lot of favors. But getting you out isn't enough. If I make a move against Conti, I have to hurt him. I have to strike somewhere that throws him off balance, forcing him to pull his men away from the borders so I can slip you through. How? Caldwell asked. My boys have been listening to the police scanners and monitoring the hospital networks. Declan replied, his tone turning venomous. Conti moved a kid last night, a leukemia patient, transported him from St. Jude's to Northwestern Memorial, placed a heavy guard on the VIP floor. Caldwell's eyes widened. The waitress's brother. He moved the brother. Exactly, Declan said. If Conti went through the trouble of securing the boy, it means the girl cares about him. And if the girl cares, Conti cares. I'm going to send 20 of my best shooters to Northwestern. We're going to hit the VIP floor hard, not to kill the kid, but to take him hostage. When Lorenzo realizes what's happening, he'll pull his perimeter guards from the highways to secure the hospital. That's when my secondary team picks you up from the Waldorf and drives you south. Capital Catrat. Caldwell felt a sickening twist of morality in his gut. Targeting a sick child was a line even he had never crossed. But as he looked out the window and saw 2 black SUVs slowly circling the block below his building, his conscience evaporated. "Do it," Caldwell whispered. "Hit the hospital." Back at the Lake Forest estate, the atmosphere in Lorenzo's command center was utterly suffocating. The basement of the mansion had been converted into a state-of-the-art surveillance bunker, lined with glowing monitors displaying traffic feeds, banking data, and security camera footage from across the city. Lorenzo stood at the center of the room, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the intricate dark ink of his syndicate tattoos wrapping around his forearms. Dominic burst into the room, his phone pressed to his ear. His heavily scarred face pale. "Boss!" Dominic shouted over the hum of the servers. "We have a massive problem. It's Fitzpatrick." Lorenzo didn't blink, but his posture instantly rigidified into that of a predator preparing to strike. What did the Irish do? They just breached the loading dock at Northwestern Memorial. Dominic reported, his voice grim. 4 vans heavily armed. They bypassed the lobby entirely and took the service elevators. They are heading straight for the VIP pediatric floor. They're going after the boy. A silence so profound and terrifying descended upon the command center that the technicians actually stopped typing. Lorenzo's eyes went completely black. The calculated cold billionaire vanished, entirely replaced by the ruthless, blood-soaked monster that ruled the underworld. He had promised Chloe her brother was safe. He had given her his word. To Lorenzo, his word was his soul. "Dominic," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a demonic, vibrating whisper. "Gather the strike team, all of them. Heavy artillery." "Boss, if we pull the men from the perimeter, Caldwell might slip through the south side routes," Dominic warned. "This is a diversion. Declan wants the boy to draw you out." "I don't care about Caldwell right now," Lorenzo snapped, grabbing an M4 carbine rifle from the weapons rack and slamming a loaded magazine into it with a deafening clack. "If Declan Fitzpatrick wants to play with children, I will bury him and every single man wearing his colors beneath the foundation of that hospital." Lorenzo turned his eyes, locking onto the monitors. "No one touches what is mine. Let's go." As Lorenzo and his heavily armed convoy roared out of the Lake Forest estate, tearing down the empty barricaded highways toward downtown Chicago, Chloe sat in the opulent bedroom above, completely unaware that the man who had just kissed her forehead was currently driving straight into a bloodbath to save the only family she had left. Black SUVs tore down the desolate barricaded lanes of the Kennedy Expressway, their massive supercharged engines roaring like unleashed beasts in the dead of the Chicago night. Lorenzo sat in the back of the lead-armored Cadillac Escalade, his handsome face transformed into a mask of carved, unforgiving granite. Beside him, Dominic rapidly coordinated their elite tactical strike force over a heavily encrypted radio channel, his voice a low, urgent hum against the screaming tires. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed ominously, reading exactly 3:42 a.m. They were less than 4 minutes away from the Galter Pavilion at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Declan Fitzpatrick's Irish mercenaries were currently attempting to breach the fortified VIP pediatric wing. Fear did not exist in Lorenzo's vocabulary, but a dark, consuming rage was currently boiling in his veins. He had given Chloe his absolute word that her younger brother would be protected. In Lorenzo's violent, treacherous underworld, a man's word was his soul. To break a promise to the woman he had just violently claimed as his own was an unforgivable sin. He checked the magazine of his custom M4 carbine rifle, his thumb brushing over the cold, lethal steel. "Status report, Dominic." Lorenzo commanded, his voice vibrating with a terrifying demonic calmness that always preceded absolute carnage. The Irish breached the lower loading dock through the service entrance on Huron Street. Dominic replied, his scarred face illuminated by the pale blue light of his tactical tablet. They bypassed the main lobby security desks and took the freight elevators. Our interior guards have locked down the 16th floor. Dr. Alistair Montgomery and his nursing staff are currently secured inside the medical bunker adjacent to Leo's private suite. 4 of Declan's men are attempting to blow the reinforced fire doors right now. Tell our men inside to fall back into the suite and hold the final perimeter. Lorenzo ordered, his pale, frozen ocean eyes narrowing into lethal slits. I want the Irish to think they are winning. Let them breach the hallway. I want them trapped in the corridor when we arrive from behind. No one who stepped foot in that hospital wearing Declan's colours leaves breathing. Meanwhile, on the 16th floor of the Galta Pavilion, absolute terror had gripped the sterile, brightly lit hallways. The heavy scent of medical-grade antiseptic was rapidly being replaced by the acrid, burning smell of cordite and shattered drywall. Inside the sprawling VIP pediatric suite, 12-year-old Leo Henderson huddled in the corner of his hospital bed, clutching his IV stand with trembling hands. His pale, tired face was buried in the chest of Dr. Alistair Montgomery, who was bravely shielding the young boy with his own body. Outside the heavy reinforced oak door of the suite, 4 of Lorenzo's heavily armed syndicate enforcers stood like statues of death, their automatic weapons trained directly on the entrance. Heavy, echoing thuds reverberated through the corridor outside as the Irish mercenaries systematically planted breaching charges on the sector's fire doors. Declan Fitzpatrick's top lieutenant, a massive red-haired bruiser named O'Connor, grinned maliciously as the timer on the explosives ticked down. They believed Lorenzo was miles away, desperately trying to lock down the city borders to catch Richard Caldwell. They believed this extraction would be a simple, bloody snatch and grab. Boom! The heavy steel fire doors blew inward, a cloud of thick grey smoke and pulverized concrete flooding the pristine hospital corridor. O'Connor and his team of 15 heavily armed mercenaries surged forward, their boots crunching over shattered glass and ceiling tiles. "Take the boy!" O'Connor roared over the ringing alarms. "Kill the guards, grab the kid, and let's get out of here." They sprinted down the corridor, their weapons raised fully, expecting a frantic, disorganized defense. Instead, they ran directly into a brilliantly orchestrated slaughter. As the Irish mercenaries rushed past the elevator banks, the digital displays above the stainless steel doors suddenly chimed in unison. Ding, ding, ding. O'Connor froze, skidding to a halt on the linoleum floor, his eyes widening in sudden, paralyzing realization. The freight elevators hadn't been deactivated. They had been overridden. The heavy silver doors slid open simultaneously. Lorenzo Conti stepped out of the center elevator, a dark, avenging god stepping into the sterile light. He did not wear a tactical helmet or a balaclava. He wanted these men to look directly into the eyes of the man who was about to end their lives. Flanked by 10 of his most lethal, battle-hardened syndicate operators, Lorenzo raised his M4 carbine rifle with terrifying, practiced precision. "You are trespassing," Lorenzo stated his voice, echoing clearly through the smoke-filled hallway. Before O'Connor could even raise his weapon or shout a command, Lorenzo pulled the trigger. The corridor instantly erupted into a deafening, blinding storm of muzzle flashes and shattered tile. Lorenzo moved through the chaos with the cold, mechanical grace of an apex predator. He did not waste a single bullet. He fired with absolute devastating accuracy, dropping mercenaries before they could even comprehend the ambush. Dominic and the rest of the Italian strike force pushed forward a tidal wave of superior firepower and flawless tactical execution, systematically dismantling the Irish assault team in a matter of seconds. O'Connor, bleeding heavily from his shoulder, desperately scrambled backward toward the stairwell, trying to escape the bloodbath. He reached the heavy metal door, his bloody hand slipping on the handle, when a large, heavy boot slammed into his spine, sending him crashing face-first into the wall. Lorenzo stood over the coughing, broken lieutenant, his rifle lowered, a custom-suppressed Glock 19 now gripped loosely in his right hand. "Please!" O'Connor choked out, spitting blood onto the pristine floor. "It was a contract. Declan hired us for Caldwell. It was just business." "You targeted a child," Lorenzo whispered, pressing the cold steel barrel of the Glock directly against the back of O'Connor's skull. "That is not business. That is an insult." Pfft! The suppressed gunshot was terrifyingly quiet. Lorenzo stepped over the body without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. He holstered his weapon and walked down the silent, smoke-filled corridor toward the VIP suite. His men immediately fell back, giving their boss a wide, respectful berth. Lorenzo knocked gently on the heavy oak door. "Open it," he commanded softly. The locks disengaged, and the door swung open. Lorenzo stepped inside, the terrifying aura of the Mafia boss instantly melting away as his eyes landed on the trembling young boy huddled on the bed. Lorenzo lowered his weapon completely, letting it hang on its sling, and crouched down to eye level with Leo. He ignored the terrified, wide-eyed stares of Dr. Montgomery and the nursing staff. "Leo," Lorenzo asked, his voice incredibly warm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the violence he had just committed outside. The young boy nodded slowly, looking at the tall, imposing man in the black trench coat. Are you one of the bad guys?" Leo whispered timidly. Lorenzo offered a small, surprisingly genuine smile. "I am a very bad guy, Leo. But I am your sister's bad guy, and she sent me here to make sure you were completely safe." "Are you hurt?" Leo shook his head, his small shoulders finally relaxing. "No. The doctor protected me." Lorenzo looked up at Dr. Montgomery, his pale eyes flashing with profound respect. "Your medical facility will receive a $10 million anonymous donation by Sunrise Doctor. And you have my personal gratitude. No one will ever threaten this floor again." Lorenzo tapped his earpiece, standing back up to his full towering height. "Dominic," he spoke into the comms. "The boy is secure. Clean up the corridor before the police arrive, and have the mayor sweep the incident under the rug." "Understood, boss," Dominic replied over the radio. "And what about Richard Caldwell? He took the bait. Our trackers show his vehicle is currently crossing the city limits, heading south on Interstate 94, toward the Indiana border." A dark, terrifying smirk curved Lorenzo's lips. Caldwell truly believed he had outsmarted the devil. "Let him run a little further," Lorenzo commanded softly. "Then spring the trap." Richard Caldwell was sweating profusely, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the leather armrest in the back of the armored Lincoln Town car. The Chicago skyline was rapidly fading in the rearview mirror, replaced by the dark, industrial stretches of the Southern Highway. He had done it. He had actually survived the wrath of Lorenzo Conti. The Irish diversion at the hospital had worked perfectly, drawing Conti's forces downtown and leaving the southern smuggling routes entirely unguarded. "Step on it," Caldwell snapped at his driver, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Miller, whom he had hired just 2 weeks prior. "Once we cross the state line, head straight for the private airfield in Gary. My contacts have a chartered Cessna waiting to fly us to Zurich. We are almost clear." Miller did not reply. He simply kept his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. The digital clock on the dashboard read 4:15 a.m. They were exactly 3 miles away from the Indiana border. Freedom was so close, Caldwell could practically taste it. He poured himself a shaky glass of bourbon from the vehicle's minibar, laughing a manic, breathy laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. "Conti is a fool," Caldwell muttered to himself, taking a heavy gulp of the burning liquid. "He thinks he controls the whole board. He was so obsessed with that pathetic, clumsy waitress that he left his back door completely wide open." Suddenly the Lincoln Town car began to decelerate. Caldwell frowned, leaning forward toward the partition. "What are you doing? Why are you slowing down? There's no traffic out here." "Keep moving." "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell," Miller said, his voice completely devoid of panic or urgency. It was terrifyingly calm. "But my instructions were very specific." "Instructions? What instructions?" "I pay your salary," Caldwell screamed, genuine panic clawing its way back into his throat. "You pay my civilian salary," Miller corrected, slowly pulling the heavy vehicle onto the desolate shoulder of Interstate 94. The car rolled to a complete stop beneath a flickering, broken street lamp. Miller turned around in his seat, a custom-engraved syndicate pistol resting casually in his hand, pointing directly at Caldwell's chest. "Mr. Conti pays my true salary. He has been paying it for the last 6 months. You see, Mr. Caldwell, my boss, likes to have eyes inside the organizations of every powerful man in Chicago, just in case they ever become a nuisance." The glass of bourbon slipped from Caldwell's hand, spilling over the expensive leather seats. He couldn't breathe. The air had been completely sucked out of the cabin. You work for Lorenzo." Caldwell stammered, his mind shattering into a million terrified pieces. The entire escape, the Irish diversion, the open highway, it had all been an incredibly elaborate, perfectly orchestrated trap. Lorenzo had simply allowed him to run just far enough to feel hope, only to violently rip it away. Outside the parked Lincoln, the dark highway suddenly illuminated as 4 massive black SUVs surrounded them, cutting off any physical chance of escape. The doors swung open, and heavily armed syndicate enforcers stepped out into the cold night air. Dominic approached the rear door of the Lincoln, yanking it open with brutal force. "Get out, Richard!" Dominic commanded, grabbing the billionaire by his expensive silk collar and dragging him forcefully out onto the rough asphalt. Caldwell fell to his knees, weeping openly, his pride completely shattered. Dominic pulled out a secure satellite phone and handed it down to the trembling man. "The boss wants to say goodbye." Caldwell took the phone with shaking hands, pressing it to his ear. "Lorenzo, please, I'll give you everything. My companies, my offshore accounts, just let me live. I beg you. You had a choice." "Richard." Lorenzo's voice echoed through the receiver, dark, smooth, and utterly merciless. He sounded as though he were relaxing in his study, completely unbothered by the violence occurring miles away. "You chose to target my woman. Then you chose to target her little brother. You crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed." "I was desperate. It was just business. And this is justice," Lorenzo whispered. "Your financial empire is gone. Your reputation is ash, and you no longer exist. Goodbye, Richard." The line went dead. Caldwell stared at the phone in absolute horror, looking up at Dominic. "What? What happens now?" "Now," Dominic said, grimly, signaling for two of his enforcers to step forward. "You disappear." Dawn was just beginning to break over Lake Michigan, casting a brilliant golden glow across the manicured lawns of the Lake Forest estate. Chloe stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows in the master bedroom, nervously twisting her fingers together. She had been pacing for hours completely in the dark about the absolute chaos unfolding across the city. The heavy mahogany door clicked open, and Chloe spun around. Lorenzo stepped into the room. He looked exhausted. His black trench coat discarded his Henley shirt, slightly wrinkled, but he was entirely unharmed. The dark, terrifying aura of the Mafia boss had vanished the instant his eyes found her, replaced by a soft, profound warmth that completely captivated her heart. "Lorenzo!" Chloe gasped, running across the massive room without a second thought. She threw her arms around his waist, burying her face against his solid, heavily muscled chest. Lorenzo let out a low, content sigh, his large arms immediately wrapping securely around her trembling frame. He rested his chin on the top of her head, closing his eyes, inhaling the sweet, calming scent of vanilla and lavender that clung to her hair. "I'm here, Mia Cara. I'm right here. What happened? Are you okay? Is Leo safe?" She fired off, leaning back to look up into his striking pale eyes. "Leo is perfectly safe," Lorenzo promised, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Dr. Montgomery is taking excellent care of him. The threat has been completely neutralized. Declan Fitzpatrick will never test my borders again, and Richard Caldwell is no longer a concern in this world." Chloe swallowed hard, processing the absolute terrifying power this man wielded. He had literally shut down an entire sprawling metropolis engaged in a violent shootout and dismantled a billionaire's empire in less than 12 hours, all because a man had gripped her wrist too hard and spilled a glass of wine. "You did all of this for me," she whispered, tears pooling in her beautiful eyes. "I still don't understand how I could possibly be worth this kind of war." Lorenzo's expression grew intensely serious. He cupped her face with both of his large, warm hands, forcing her to maintain steady eye contact. "Listen to me, Chloe. My entire life has been built in the freezing shadows. I have fought for power, for control, for survival. But the moment I saw you in that restaurant, struggling so beautifully, trying so hard to survive in a world that was determined to crush you, you brought light into my dark universe." He leaned down his forehead, resting gently against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the quiet golden room. "You are not a clumsy waitress," Lorenzo murmured, his voice thick with raw, unrestrained emotion. "You are the bravest, purest thing I have ever encountered. You are the only person who looks at me and doesn't just see the monster. You see the man. I didn't claim you because I wanted to own you, Chloe. I claimed you because my soul recognized yours. You are my queen, and from this day forward, Chicago belongs to you." Chloe let out a soft, shuddering breath, the final walls of her terror completely dissolving. She didn't care about the syndicate, the violence, or the immense, terrifying wealth. She only cared about the man holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile treasure in the entire world. She stood on her tiptoes, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck, and pressed her lips against his. Lorenzo responded instantly, pulling her flush against his solid body, deepening the kiss with a fierce, burning passion that sealed their undeniable fate. The billionaire real estate mogul had tried to publicly humiliate her, hoping to ruin her life. Instead, he had unknowingly handed her the keys to the kingdom, placing her safely in the arms of the most powerful, devoted man in the city. The clumsy waitress was gone forever. the new Queen of Chicago had officially arrived. If this thrilling tale of power, absolute devotion, and mafia justice kept you on the edge of your seat, you absolutely won't want to miss what we have coming next. Hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with your friends who love an intense romance filled with dark twists and unrelenting drama. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single update on our latest captivating audio stories. Your incredible support helps us bring these high-stakes romantic adventures to life. Thank you, and stay tuned.